There's a lot of anger and frustration around AI data centers being built. But what's the truth? How do they hurt communities? Let's look at the actual impact of data centers on communities. Now, every action you take has a cost. Too often, we look at the benefits of an action and forget to look at the drawbacks. In this series, we are looking at the costs associated with AI in various sectors in order to have a better understanding of what we're giving up in order to gain the benefits of AI. Now, if you want to support this channel and the free content that I produce, consider purchasing one of my courses at iamtimcorey.com. I have master courses on C#, web development, and Unity, as well as training courses covering a variety of topics. And those sales directly fund this free content. All right, so let's start with this. This is kind of a typical article you might see today, the dark side of AI, the shocking report that reveals 11 planned AI data centers connected to OpenAI, Meta, and Microsoft could produce more greenhouse gases than Morocco, which it's hard to quantify greenhouse gases in a way that people actually understand. Like they give you a number, you go, is that bad or is that good? I mean, it's 1 billion parts per million. What does that mean? It actually doesn't mean anything. But you hear all these different terms, and so these articles a lot of times will put them in comparison terms like this. More greenhouse gases than Morocco. I don't know how much greenhouse gases Morocco produces, but okay, that is a lot. But let's talk about the actual impacts, because too often we leave it at the titles like this and go, oh man, that's horrible, or it's not so bad. It's only Morocco or whatever. So let's look at the actual impacts. And let's start here with the Utah data center that's just been approved. It's I think 9 gigawatt, also some are saying 7.5 gigawatt facility that's going to be in Utah. It's been approved. It's twice the size of Manhattan. Again, one of those fun comparisons. If you know the size of Manhattan, okay, it's twice the size of that. But here's the real kicker. And I think this is one of the things that's really important to point out. Forget all the rest of the comparisons. This facility would require more power than the entire state uses. That is a big deal. One facility, more power than the entire state. Now you may say, well, Tim, they're going to bring their own power. It's no big deal because, who cares? But let's get into this. It's expected to raise the state's planet heating pollution by about 50%. So forget about if you care about the planet or not, or, the heat, whatever. Just think about how much heat Utah creates, 50% more because of this one data center. Now, is that a big deal? Well, it's going to, in that valley, it's going to raise the daytime temperatures between 2 and 5 degrees Fahrenheit. And at night, between 8 to 12 degrees Fahrenheit in increased heat. Now, why does that matter? Because the fact it's going to impose substantial drying on a watershed and ecosystem already in active collapse. Essentially, it's going to turn this into more of a desert. That's a problem. It's going to damage a lot of things and cause trickle-down effects that don't just impact the data center or even that valley. They're going to continue to spread out. It's the ripple effects of any action. You throw a stone in the pond, it's not just the hole in the water it creates, it's all the ripples that come out after it. And that's what this is showing, that's a significant deal. That's a ecologically impactful change. Now, let's talk about this. And we come back to this idea that they're going to bring their own power. They're going to bring their own power. So even though it uses more power than the entire state does, what does it matter? Well, how about this Lake Tahoe residents? Nearly 50,000 Lake Tahoe residents have to find a new power source after their energy source looks to redirect lines to data centers. So this is a weird area, and we'll talk a bit about this. You can go into more detail. All these articles are listed down below. You can go read all of them and get more detail on every situation I'm talking about. But this is a weird situation because in the US, we have different steps along the way, right? We have the power generator, like the actual company that owns the generation of the power. And then we have the power transmission that can be a different company. And so here, what they're saying is, hey, we're going to redirect the power in these lines to a different place. And so while they still have power lines and those power lines can still accept power, there's no power being put on them for Lake Tahoe. And that's going to happen in 2027. It's not immediate. It's a year from now. But this is happening. They're cutting off 50,000 people because the data center wants more power. So when it comes to, well, they're going to bring their own power, some do. But there's also the idea that it has a direct impact on communities when they don't. So this is why it's so messy in this situation. Specifically, no singular regulator oversees the entire chain. So now here's the important part. If you understand how utilities work in the United States, especially electric, the way electricity works is that power companies pass all costs on to you. They're legally required to pass all costs on to you in your bill. So when they build a new plant, the power company does, not a third party independently, but when a power company builds a plant, those costs go directly in your bill. Happens. It's required to happen. The electric companies are required to make a profit, which great business to be in. But here's where the sticky point comes in. Because that company said, hey, we're going to give to a data center instead of you 50,000 customers or 49,000 people, then those 49,000 people to get that power from somewhere else. Building a direct connection to California's grid, which would probably be a great idea for giving them more energy independence and more ability to choose which generator, because there's less generation options for them to choose from. But getting a direct connection to the California grid would cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Who pays for that? Those customers and the other customers that aren't even in Lake Tahoe, because that gets passed to a region and that region has to pay those bills. So there is a $4.2 billion transmission line from Las Vegas to Yerington that is expected to come in about the same time as the current power is getting cut off because of that data center. So that, Liberty will be the first in the waiting line for that power. But again, 70% of the project's cost will be borne by Southern Nevada customers. So Southern Nevada customers who didn't have any reason to need this are going to have to pay the bill for $4.2 billion. All right. So this right here, existing customers would end up paying for infrastructure built to serve industrial demand that may never materialize. And this is from 2024. This report is saying, hey, these things might not ever come, but because the companies, the utility companies, have to plan for it, they're putting in all this infrastructure to try and get ready, and it may never come. You may say, well, no, they've already purchased the land, they're good to go. That's only if that company survives. Most data centers are not on track. When you look at all these major announcements, they're announcements. When you actually go look at the property, there's a property in England, we'll talk about another video. There's a property in England where they say, definitely, we're on track. And you go look there, it's a scrapyard. It's not actually a data center, but they can say it's in progress. So those things might not ever come around. And because they aren't there yet, well, too bad. You're not going to get the income from those data centers buying the electricity and paying like any other utility purchaser does. But yet, the customers of the utility build out are going to be paying for these changes, this build out that may never be supported by an AI company. I think this last line is really important. I pulled it out specifically. We have no representation. It's a resource extraction. That's what customers are saying about how they feel about this situation. They don't have any say. They don't have any voice in the process. They're just told, hey, guess what? You're going to pay more. It's because of data centers, but tough, right? So that's a problem. When companies don't bring their own power, that's a problem. Let's talk about water for a minute. Let's switch over to Georgia. Georgia has quite a few data centers. One data center drained nearly 30. It's, I think, 29 million gallons of water unnoticed. Now, before you get too caught up in they're stealing water, it's not really what it was, probably. I'm going to give them the big benefit of the doubt. What happened was two different commercial water lines were hooked up to the city. They didn't know or didn't record. Now, they may have, somebody knew because they actually hooked them up. But forget for a minute that they were borrowing water they didn't pay for. Let's move past it because that's not actually the issue here. All right. So yes, 30 million gallons of water or nearly 30 million were taken without initially paying for it. But let's talk a bit more about this. The reason they found out is because the water pressure to the area was low. Stop right there. Whether the town knew about it or not, let's just pretend for a minute the town did know about it, and this is all above board. The water pressure for the community was low. So the water pressure for the community was directly impacted by the data center. More than 29 million gallons of water went unaccounted for. But here's the real important line. Again, forget out the outrage over they stole water. Forget that. Look at this last line here. That far exceeds the peak limit agreed to during the data center planning process. So forget that the water was taken without authorization or not being paid for. Forget all that because they did pay for it eventually. The important parts here are the water pressure for the residents went down significantly, so much so that they actually complained. And the water used was more than the peak agreed to amount of water. That is significant because it's not what you say, it's what you do. See, these AI companies are saying, we're not going to use more than this amount of water. We're not going to use more than this amount of electricity. We're going to pay all the bills. These are all nice things. What do you do? And in this case, what they did was exceeded what they said they would do. Now, here's a kicker. Right now, the campus is only partially operational. So they exceeded the amount of water, even though the campus is only partially operational. How? Well, let's come back to that in just a minute. More than 200 data facilities are in Georgia right now, and Georgia is experiencing a moderate to high level of drought. So data centers come in using an extraordinary amount of water, even more than they said they were going to use, during a moderate to high level of drought. So, and here's where the residents really get upset. The local officials said that the community members need to scale back their water usage. You have an AI company that's exceeding what it's allocated and wasn't even paying for it initially, but forget that for a minute. They're exceeding what they were allocated, exceed what they were told, what they said they would do. And you're telling residents, you need to scale back because water is critical right now. The reason why they were exceeding, they say, was temporary construction-related activities. You go, okay, so it was just during construction, it's temporary, got it, that won't happen again, right? Well, those temporary construction activities are expected to finish in 3 to 5 years. I can tell you that a lot of data center projects are behind schedule. So that 3 to 5 years might be 5 to 7. So even 3 to 5, they are exceeding what they were given, what they said they would take. They're exceeding that. And they said, don't worry, it's only for 3 to 5 years. 3 to 5 years of negative impact is still negative impact. Here's where it gets kind of wraps things up. Tigert confirmed the utility did not penalize or fine the data center. That's frustrating. The community says they run all over us like the citizens don't matter and they're above the law. Even Gregory Pierce says it's unusual that the utility didn't fine them for breaking their rules. But here's the response. We have to be partners. It's called customer service. So customer service is going to matter when it's a data center, but it doesn't matter for you because you're small. So even though the data center has the biggest impact negatively on the community, they have the least responsibility to do anything about it. When they say we're going to use this much water and they exceed that, it doesn't matter. And that's a major reason why data centers are a problem. It's not just because they have a oversized usage of electricity and water and land use, and we'll talk about, noise pollution and all the rest, but it's because they do all of that. And even what they say they're going to do, they exceed. And then there's no consequences for that because we want to have good customer service. So it feels like the people don't matter. Let's get into the land and water impact of the AI boom. So this is a report from the Lincoln Institute. Again, all these links are down below. I've pulled out a few of these passages. Again, read the whole thing. There's lots of good stuff. This came out in October 17th of 2025, just so we're clear, because some of the things are based upon 2024 and 2025 numbers, no 2026 numbers yet. But mid-sized data center consumes as much water as a small town, while larger ones require up to 5 million gallons of water every day. That's as much as a city of 50,000 people. Now, I want to pause right there. We're going to get into it a little bit. But you may say, I've been told that data centers don't use that much water anymore. It's not true. It is true. It is true for a lot of data centers. But we're going to get into the idea that there are things called closed loop systems. We'll talk more about it in a minute. Closed loop versus the active cooling that uses water that evaporates. So we'll get into that in a minute. But yes, large data centers can use up to 5 million gallons of water every day, which is the equivalent of 50,000 people. But then powering takes even more water and more power. A conventional data center draws as much electricity. Now, this is conventional. A conventional data center draws as much electricity as 10 to 25,000 households. That's for like AWS, like hosting or places where you have your websites and stuff like that. That's traditional data center. Draws as much electricity as between 10 and 25,000 households. Again, weird numbers to try and kind of wrap our brains around what this means. But let's compare that because comparison is easier. AI-focused hyperscale data centers can use as much power as 100,000 homes or more. So 4 to 10 times as much power for the same footprint. So this is where the amount of power going into these units is incredible. Now, how do they impact jobs? Well, the facilities themselves are not powerful long-term job engines. And this is a good example, I think. It's a little apples to oranges, we'll talk about it, but AOL had their headquarters in an area called Data Center Alley. And that company had a data center as well as a larger campus for people. And that's where the oranges kind of comes in here in the apples to oranges comparison, because they had not just a data center, but also some offices and other things. But in this footprint, in this area of land, they had employed 5,300 people. Now, that same footprint of land employs between 100 and 150 employees. You may say, well, that's more efficient, right? No, it's not, because yes, in theory, that means less cost, but the reality is they're paying for it in other areas. But the bigger deal here is, what's the impact on the community? That same amount of land used to employ 5,300 people. Now it employs between 100 and 150. So in theory, over 5,000 people have to look elsewhere outside of that area for a job. Now, yes, you can't really say, well, you have to employ the same amount of people. That's not fair. And yes, improvements do come around in different areas employ, a different amount of people. And sure, I get all of that. But the community impact is 5,000 people don't have a job or have to go somewhere else for a job. That impacts community because when it comes to paying taxes, there's over 5,000 less people paying taxes in that area because of that same square footprint. Okay. So when it comes to, does it benefit the community? As far as jobs, no, it doesn't. In fact, it hurts the community. But let's talk again, water usage. The Houston Advanced Research Center and the University of Houston did a study and found that Texas data centers in 2025, again, this report came out near the end of 2025, will use 49 billion gallons of water in Texas. Now, Texas is a massive place. I live here. I should know. But 49 billion gallons of water are going to be used by data centers. As much as 399 billion gallons of water will be used by 2030. So forget for a moment the idea that you have to comprehend, is that a lot or is that a little? The idea that whatever number we have right now is baseline. Let's say that's baseline. We're going to multiply that by 8 and say that's how much the new normal is going to be in just 5 years. That is going to have a direct impact on communities all over Texas. And yes, Texas does struggle a lot with water. And there's whole cities like Corpus Christi that's struggling to even, figure out they can survive because they're out of water. Yes, water is a problem, and we're going to get into why. So, but let's get into this idea that, well, not all data centers, right? Hashtag not all data centers. Because there is a closed loop water system. And the idea there is, so the open loop water system, the idea is you have fins, and I'm not an expert in this, but basically you have fins that are radiating heat and you pour water over them to cool those down. And that water will, of course, evaporate into steam and just float away. And you are left with a whole bunch of stuff that was in the water, the salt and other things that were in the water, which builds up and you have to scrape off and put in a dump somewhere. And that's a problem because that's an environmental impact all of its own. But that's why they use so much water, and also why they use so much clean water. You'd say, well, can you go to the ocean and just dump a whole bunch of ocean water in it? No, because there's a whole lot more junk in the water, which means a whole lot more junk that's left behind during evaporation, which means that a whole much more junk you have to clean off, and it's a whole mess, right? So they use clean water. Well, closed loop system, the idea is you put the water in pipes and then it doesn't evaporate away. Therefore, one data center said, hey, we use as much water as 4 regular households do in a year. So nothing, no impact, which is kind of true and kind of not. But let's talk about that, because this closed loop system is a good idea. It's more expensive, which can be a problem, but also it requires more electricity. So why does that matter? Well, they're already using a lot, right? We'll get into that in a minute, but the basic reason why it's important is because electricity uses fossil fuel like natural gas. Hey, we're in a shortage right now, not a shortage, but a cost increase for all of petroleum products, and we're putting in a whole lot more petroleum guzzling stations. But those power plants, guess what they use? And you have to have more of them. They use water. They use more water. So you're not just getting free water usage because you have a closed loop system. You're actually using more water in other areas. We'll get back to that in a minute. But Google in 2023, again, if we think of the ramp up with data centers, it has exploded in 2024, 2025, 2026, and it continues to go up in an exponential way. So 2023 numbers are a pittance compared to what they'll be in 2026, just so we're clear. But Google said that in 2023 used 5 billion gallons of water across all its data centers, with 31% of its freshwater withdrawals coming from watersheds with medium or high scarcity. So in 31% of the case, they're pulling from areas that are in drought-like conditions. That's a problem because they're only ramping up how much water they use, and they're actually putting these data centers in places where they have to use even more water, even though they're struggling. Utah, Arizona, etc. They're putting data centers there and drawing even more water out of the area. So let's just for a minute, and I want to make sure we're kind of get a good rounded picture here. It's not just cooling the server room chips that consumes water. Fossil fuel power plants themselves use a lot of water. Okay. But also each chip has already consumed thousands of gallons of water in its creation. And remember, these chips last at most 3 to 5 years, and then they're cycling them out. And they are using so many of them that they are crushing the world's supply of GPUs, RAM, and more in order to get as much as possible. And yet those are using a ton of water in themselves. Okay. So again, just kind of round the picture. I'm not too worried about that part of it because we're going to create those chips either way. It's still a problem. We still need to think about how we carefully do that, but just want to round out that view of, yes, it's not just the actual query that you run in ChatGPT that costs water. It's all the things that came before it that cost water. You might say, well, who cares? Water is eternal, right? Water keeps coming back. But water, and I love this statement here, water is local. That's the important part. It's not that when water evaporates, it goes in the atmosphere and it comes down as rain somewhere else. And that continues, if you went to school in the US, you probably went through the water cycle that I went through, where you understand how the water cycle works. But the problem is that water truly is local. So yes, there's not going to be a water shortage globally, in theory, because of data centers. But at the same time, yes, it can cause drought. It can change ecologies. It can cause long-term water impacts in areas because water is local. You only have so much water in a given area. So it talks about, hey, a small amount of water for a few queries, that's not a big deal, except for the fact it's being taken from one basin where that data center is located. So it's continuing to draw out and draw out and draw out from one area. It's going to dry that area out. Remember, again, that Utah data center where they're raising the temperature, and that's going to cause the area to dry out even more. And it's going to cause problems where they don't have the water there, and that's going to cause impact for the community all around. So back to electric, this report kind of jumps back and forth between the two. Those costs, the costs of maintaining the grid and upgrades are typically shared by all electric companies in the service area. So the entire service area must pay for the associated infrastructure. And here's the kicker. There's a secondly point here. If a utility makes a huge investment, but the data center eventually closes or needs much less electricity, it's the ratepayers who will foot the bill, not the data center. We think that these companies have unlimited money, and it feels like they do because of the fact that they've been operating at a loss for years now, and it seemingly never ends. They keep getting more investments and more investments and more investments. But at some point, They either have to run out of money or raise the rates to meet the actual costs. Copilot has started to do this. I don't think that they are yet to the point where they're covering the actual costs, but they're getting closer. So you'll see, and I have a separate video on this, you'll see that those costs are going up 10, 20, 50%. I'm sorry, 50 times what the costs were. People that were paying $39 are now going to have to pay over $1,000 a month. Well, that's not going to happen. People are going to go, no, I can't do that, and go somewhere else until there's nowhere else to go. So at some point, these data centers are going to fail. There's going to be some, not all, there's still be data centers, there's still going to be AI, but at some point, the music stops. The investments stop. Banks are already going, this is a sketchy proposition. Investors are already going, I'm not sure I want to put more billions into this process. Investments that were going to be $50 billion raise are now $30 billion raise because we can't get the other 20. Well, at some point, you run out of money. And this is where we've seen data centers around the world that have cut back their grand plans. I live in Texas, and Abilene is a big data center area. Only they cut back after 2 facilities are built, and there's one more, I think, that has been built or being built because I believe OpenAI stepped in when Oracle stepped out or something like that. But anyways, this whole big plan, it got really cut back as to how much was actually going to happen. Well, when that happens, it doesn't matter that they promised a big data center. They didn't actually build it. And so they're not actually using as much power as they said they were going to. And yet, the utility companies will build out all the things they need and then pass those costs on to the customers. And yes, these companies say, well, we'll build our own power plants. Cool. But you're not building your own transmission lines. You're not upgrading your current facilities. And those costs are still going to the consumer. So if the AI companies pull out, if they scale back, if they don't use as much, it's going to be the consumer that gets left holding the bag. So you might say, well, what if they build their own stuff? Microsoft is doing that. They're actually restarting 3 Mile Island. And they've got a 20-year agreement to purchase energy directly from the 3 Mile Island nuclear facility, which is being restarted. So they're independent of the grid. They're creating clean power, independent of the grid. And I do like the idea of bringing back and using more nuclear because it is one of the cleanest ways of the cleanest way of creating power in this country. And yet that's not necessarily all a good thing because they're still going to use the transmission lines, but they're not paying for that infrastructure through their utility bill because they're going directly to 3 Mile Island and just paying the actual plant. So there's those transmission lines are still getting used, have to get upgraded and all the rest, and yet they're not necessarily going to be paying for those. Now they may chip in, who knows? But the reality is the people in the area still pay even when it's built by Microsoft or funded by Microsoft and done directly off the normal grid. They're still going to pay. So communities are saying, hey, we're trying to attract these big data centers to reap the tax benefits. The problem is that the local community gets those tax benefits, but the region still has to have the consequences, but not the tax benefits. So the regional impact is dispersed larger than the actual financial value that comes in. So maybe one little area gets a little bit of benefit from a data center, but yet the larger area pays the costs. And that's a problem. So the problem is localities are not looking at the regional impacts. They're looking at just what's good for them. So here's the real bottom line from this report. I think it was a really important phrase that we need to force data center operators to explain how they're going to run the facility more efficiently and where they're going to get their water from. And this is really important, so I highlighted it, not just assume that they have first access to water and energy systems, which is what is currently happening. They're being given first access to the power and first access to the water. That's not good for the community. So that's the report from the Lincoln Institute. Let's move on. Let's talk about this report from Consumer Reports, AI data centers, big tech's impact on electric bills, water, and more. I'm going to try not to, keep beating a dead horse, but I want to make sure that we understand impact here. So areas with high concentration of data centers saw electricity prices jump 267% over the past 5 years. So again, it's not what you say, it's what you do. So these data center companies saying, hey, we're not going to impact your power costs. And yet prices have jumped 267% in the past 5 years. Now, to be fair, it's not only data centers that are causing those bills to jump, but in the areas with high concentrations of data centers, those bills go up more than if there wasn't data centers. So they are having an impact. Electric utilities are spending billions to build new transmission lines and power plants. And they're passing those costs on the consumer because that's how the utility business model has always worked. And it's important to understand these business models were designed before data centers. These business models were designed with the idea that you had factories and you had warehouses, and you had other things that were more beneficial to the community, as opposed to really, there's very little benefit to community when it comes to data center. There's very few jobs. There's very little that comes in. Yes, there's some taxes that come in, and that's great. But then the costs for all those things go up for everyone. And that's a net negative. So they're using a model that has always worked, but AI data center are kind of breaking that model. They're taking advantage of it. So this is the impact they're also seeing, is that when they build data centers, they don't just build data centers in the middle of nowhere. They build data centers even in residential areas. And yet all that construction can cause significant issues. Now, this is a rural area where Meta is building its Hyperion campus. The accidents jumped more than 600%. Now, I haven't looked into this number because in a rural area, those accidents were 10, which 600% would be 60, right? So, right? Yeah, 60. So that's still significant, but maybe it's not, end of the world. But what it does highlight is that it brings much more traffic to a rural area or to any area where a data center is coming in. And the roads just aren't able to handle this because that construction happens constantly for years. As we saw in that Georgia example, 3 to 5 years. And again, that's if they're on track. So then we talk about the fact that generators that power the diesel and natural gas can be noisy and emit harmful pollutants, which have been linked to cancer, heart disease, and respiratory problems. But here's the real kicker. Because many data centers are built close to homes and schools, these emissions can put nearby residents and children at particular risk. So 82% of California data centers are located in communities already facing poor air quality. And again, talking about bringing your own power just makes it worse, because it's not just the coolers, it's not just the systems that are trying to maintain the temperature for the GPUs and the heat waste and all the rest. It's, if you bring your own power, now you're talking about bringing in lots of power plants that are all generating noise and power too. So this one really frustrates me. In a little way, I understand, and we'll talk about it. But so the University of Mary Washington identified 31 Virginia communities with existing, approved, or proposed data centers and found that the vast majority, 25 of 31, had non-disclosure agreements with local officials. These NDAs often kept the public from learning that a facility was even being proposed, let alone its size or impact on local community infrastructure like water and sewage systems. Now, at first glance, I get really upset. Local officials work for us, and yet what they're doing is signing NDAs saying we won't tell our bosses, who are the community, what we're doing. That's frustrating. Now, there is a reason. There can be a reason for this. If you look at the companies that build airframes, so we're talking Boeing and all the rest, they actually hold the documents for their own certifications. They don't give those to the government, even though they're government certifications. They don't give those to the government. And the reason why is because the information that is in those reports is super sensitive. And if their competitors, say Airbus, were able to request a freedom of information request of the government, they would get access to all those documents if the government held them. And so therefore, what happens is the companies have to hold them themselves, and they have a secure facility and all the rest. But they have to hold them themselves in order to protect their own business from being destroyed by outside competitors. So there is a reason for this. There is a reason why you might not want your competitors to know certain things, because it can actually hurt your business. And whether you want data centers or not, we do have to realize we want to protect businesses, especially U.S. businesses in the U.S., right? We wouldn't want a foreign entity to be able to copy and improve what a U.S. business is doing because of our regulations. That probably wouldn't be good. However, I think this is abusing the spirit of the law. And I think this happens a lot, especially today, is that we have a law for a good reason, but then we abuse the spirit of that law. I don't think that there should be any reason why the AI company can't say, we're going to use this much power, we're going to use this much water, first of all, and stick to it. We're going to have this much of an impact on the community. I think the community needs to know that. I think that has to be public information. And I understand what it's going to do is tell their competitors, hey, they're thinking about putting a data center in this area. Now, what might be the reasons why that'd be a bad thing? Well, for one, maybe it allows the competitors to kind of figure out how much they're doing or what they're going to do, maybe what kind of systems they're using to, cool their chips or whatever, and it might give them some insight into how their competitors work. Okay, that might be something. I don't think that's enough of a reason. It might also allow their competitors to say, hey, you know what? I want a data center there. That's actually a really, really good spot. I want a data center there, so I'm going to come to the community too and also propose a data center there, and maybe we'll have a bidding war. Now, it probably doesn't happen because there's land ownership that already probably happens, maybe. But wouldn't a bidding war be a good thing for the community? If Amazon and Microsoft are both trying to get the same contract for the same location, well, that would seem to indicate to me that they're going to put their best deal forward, not their cheapest deal. But if they have no competition, why would they ever give you more than the absolute minimum, right? So I think this hurts competition. I think this hurts the community. I think it hurts the idea that we are the representative democracy we are, where we can say as a community, we don't like this, and our representatives can hear that because we don't even know how to talk to them because of the fact that we can't be told that they're even considering putting a data center somewhere. So I think this is just a really bad thing. I think it's something that needs to change. I think it needs to be a change in how the laws work here. This is about job impact. Data centers bring short-term construction work. Now, short-term means 3 to 5 years or more. So that's still a significant amount of time, but they bring short-term construction work. Now, I want to pause right there for a minute. Because you might say, well, I'm a construction worker. I need that work. Absolutely. And I don't want to see you out of work. However, it has been shown that these data center projects push other projects out of the way. So it's not necessarily those construction workers either work or don't work for 3 to 5 years. That's not going to happen. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is, do you work on this project or that project? And in that light, what we're saying is that's not a huge benefit then, because yes, you're giving construction work, but that construction work would have happened in other places with different amounts of benefits. So there are relatively few permanent jobs that stay once these facilities have been completed. And as of November 2025, 2 business school professors published research finding that there's no clear evidence that data centers stimulate local growth in tech employment. There's no evidence of that. So they're basically having no impact when it comes to jobs in the area. Now, Microsoft in mid-January outlined a plan to pledge to cover its own electricity costs, reduce water, create jobs, and avoid seeking tax breaks. All good things. But remember, it's not about what you say, it's about what you do. Okay, so March, these companies and additional firms traveled to the White House to sign a, gotta love this, non-binding ratepayer protection pledge. The I swear to do no harm kind of thing, but with a lot less, with no teeth. So non-binding. And I love this statement here. Either it's a misprint by somebody or it's just the most hilarious thing ever. Among other measures, companies agreed to build, bring, or buy the power they need for data centers. I'm sorry. Look at that sentence again. Look at those 3 words. They sound great. They all go together. They're all bees. Build your own power. Okay, you're going to build your own power plant. Or bring your own power, I guess. Bring a line in from somewhere. Or buy the power. What's left? What other options are there? I'm going to tell you what. I'm going to pledge at my house to build, bring, or buy my own power. We all do this, right? So even that is a nonsensical non-statement. So they agree to pay for upgrades to electric grid infrastructure related to their facilities. That last bit there, related to their facilities, is doing a lot of heavy lifting, because what things are related to their facilities versus just because of the extra load on the grid overall. And that's where, even if they follow this to the letter, there's still an awful lot of costs that aren't included in this that are created by their presence on the grid. Now, this Harvard PISCO says that the pledge does nothing to help consumers, since neither the president nor tech companies control who pays for the expansion of electrical grids. That's it. They're not in charge of this, but yet they're saying, hey, we're going to do this. So this is a non-thing. This is just talk. And again, don't tell me what you're going to do. Show me. And I have not seen the direct impact of this in a positive light anywhere. All right, let's talk briefly about noise pollution. So data centers create a lot of noise. But let's talk about this, and we'll actually use real units in this, which is awesome. So data centers first that use cooling systems rather than water cooled. So again, we're talking about closed loop versus open loop, and immersive cooling and other things. They tend to be noisier. So while they're not using as much water, they tend to be noisier because of it. Noisy jet engine-like diesel generators are increasingly powering data centers, and not just as emergency backups. Jet engine-like. In fact, jet turbine engines are a pretty common thing for generators. So here's the actual numbers, right? So sounds above 85 decibels are considered harmful to a person's ears. But studies have also shown that noises above 65 decibels are enough to cause an increase in stress and high blood pressure. it's amazing to think that noise can change your blood pressure. But at the same time, if you had kids, you understand. So those numbers are important, though. 85 decibels is harmful to your ears. 65 can cause long-term issues. Okay, so let's just keep that in mind. Okay, data center neighbors have reported headaches, vertigo, nausea, sleep disturbance, ear pain, and hypertension. That sounds like maybe those things might be caused by noise. In fact, complaints around data center noise tend to focus on its 24/7 consistent presence. So probably they're not in the 85 decibel range. Probably they're lower than that, but they're probably 65 or above, where you have that constant noise in the background that's causing all types of problems. Except for the fact that down here, the second paragraph, while individual servers are not especially loud, the compounding effects of thousands or tens of thousands of servers in a computing warehouse can raise noise levels to 96 decibels. This is a problem because some data centers are as close to where people live, or close to where people live, sometimes within 50 feet of homes. That's incredibly close, which in my mind, way too close. I think that zoning laws have not kept up with the reality. You wouldn't put an industrial plant right next to a house. But because this is probably, light commercial or something like that, it's considered less of a problem, and so it can be closer to houses sometimes. I think it's a problem. But the idea that 96 decibels can be coming out of these plants. Now, again, noise goes down over distance, for sure. But again, and remember, decibels aren't this linear thing where 96 decibels is 10% more than 85? No. It's like 10 times more. It's a significant amount more because it's not just a linear scale. So 96 decibels, how far away do you have to be to even be at 65? A good distance, a very good distance. And this is what communities are living with in this noise pollution, and they don't have a voice. So noise levels from industrial-sized diesel generators can reach up to 105 decibels, as noisy as a jet engine flying overhead. So the problem is that these generators, yes, some of them are backups, and they only run once in a while, which is still a problem because when they're running, they're still incredibly loud. But some data centers, like xAI's facility in South Haven, Mississippi, have 27 natural gas-powered turbines that are disturbing the nearby area. 27 turbines, all adding up to incredibly loud noises that are disturbing the nearby neighbors. Noise pollution is a real thing, and these data centers are noisy, especially if they bring their own power, which is what that xAI facility does. All right, this is kind of wrap it up. There's few jobs that are being created by these data centers. AI data centers employ very few people. Here's what the numbers show. So a $10 billion data center may employ 300 people. That's not many, right? So $10 billion data center, 300 people, which that's one permanent position for every $33 million invested. Now compare that to TSMC. TSMC has a semiconductor complex in Phoenix, Arizona. They make chips, okay? TSMC is the company in Taiwan that everybody's concerned about because they're kind of maxed out in how many chips they can create. And when the pandemic hit, that's actually a problem for the entire world because they weren't creating chips at the maxed out capacity they were. And so the CHIPS Act allowed for construction of a large facility to create processors, chips, in our own company or country, if you're in the US, in Arizona. And this is a big deal because this allows us to be independent and not rely on somebody else for the things that we need for everyday life. So chips are in everything, not just computers. We're talking, cars and refrigerators and toasters, unfortunately, and a whole bunch of other things. require these different chips, these different processors. And so TSMC has a plant in Arizona. It's expected to create 12,000 jobs, but it's very expensive to create chips, very expensive, clean rooms and all the rest. So $165 billion of investment in this facility. But that's one job for every $14 million spent. So even in an area where you have clean rooms and you have very expensive equipment and this whole rigorous process, they are less than half of what the ratio is for Meta. So incredible how much money it costs for how little impact it has on the job market. Now, you may be thinking, who cares, right? Because I don't care if a billionaire invests $1 billion to create one job. They create one job, right? Well, yes and no, because again, these investments are taking up land, taking up resources that can be used for other things. And they're being actively pushed to the side because we want AI instead. Now, Virginia has a bunch of data centers. And Virginia data center, which are not all just AI data centers, by the way. They're data centers like Amazon, US East 1 is there and all the rest. But Virginia data centers create one permanent job for every $13 million invested. Now, in contrast, it costs $137,000 to create one job outside of the data centers, 100 times less investment. Now, again, why do we care? Well, areas are giving tax breaks. They are trying to bring in these data centers. They're trying to bring in these people because they say, hey, they're going to bring jobs to the community. Well, no, they're not. But they're going to bring income to the community. They're going to be a benefit. Well, why are we giving tax money when it's 100 times more expensive to even get one job from these companies, as opposed to giving tax money to manufacturing or to warehouses or anything else that would bring in more jobs? Again, more jobs is good for your community, and it also is good for your tax base. So again, manufacturing plants are competing for the same state incentive packages. Okay, so pharmaceutical company Becton, Dixon and Company is investing $110 million in a manufacturing expansion in Columbus. They create 120 jobs for $110 million. A new automotive venture in Orangeburg, South Carolina is investing $120 million in a new plant, bringing in 400 jobs. Both are projected to cost less than ARC Data Center's Ohio expansion, which promises 10 jobs. So these companies are competing for the same state incentive packages, local incentive packages to come to the area. And yet they caught the AI jobs or AI data centers cost a lot more. And yet they bring just a fraction of the number of jobs that any of these other things do. It is a competition. It is a competition for which one is going to, get this money. It's not an infinite pool. It's kind of like local water. Well, local money, right? You only have so much money locally. So state and local governments have offered data center incentives built on the factory-oriented frameworks. Again, our laws, our frameworks, all these things are built upon an outdated system. They don't take into account data centers. They don't take into account the idea that you have so much packed into so small an area. And so they don't make adjustments. They don't make allowances for that. They don't change how they evaluate, because they're just saying, hey, this same model is what we do for everybody. But the problem is everybody is not equal. So in one case, a data center in New York promised 125 jobs in exchange for $1.4 billion from New York. That's $11 million per job that they're asking for from the community. Now, the average cost of data center mega deals is $1.95 million per job. So communities, areas, states, they're paying nearly $2 million to get one job. So in fiscal year 2025, as next highlight, the data center industry added 1,610 jobs and reported a tax benefit of $1.9 billion. That's $1.2 million per new job that Virginia paid. That's incredible. That's not a good way. That is wasteful, especially since they're gonna want to have these areas no matter what. So again, economist Michael J. Hicks looked at data center development in Texas and found the net effect of data center employment within a county is effectively zero. The net effect is zero. We have all the problems, but we have zero net positive impact. Now, property tax revenue can be significant for these data centers. We're talking here truth, not just hype. Property tax revenue can be significant from these data centers, but property tax revenue and job creation are different metrics, and there's a reason why. Because tax revenue says, yes, the county or the area might make more money. Now, again, you gotta be careful how you do that, but they might make more money from taxes, but it's going to actually hurt the population. There's a couple things that happen there. First of all, yes, tax revenue can be great when that AI company is booming. But when they cut back, when they don't do as much, they might reduce how much they're going to reduce how much they pay to the community because they're putting less money through. And of course, big companies love to have their tax loopholes and write-offs and all the rest that make it seem like they're making no money, besides the fact that AI makes no money. But that's whether they get lots of money or not from a data center's property and property tax. The reality is the people are impacted because those people don't have a job. So this company is not coming in helping the community get more jobs. It's not creating more long-term jobs. What it's doing is giving a little bit more tax money, but having a whole bunch of negative impact on the entire region's people. I don't think that's a good trade-off. So there's a lot here. We've covered a lot from electricity to water, to noise, to jobs. There's a lot of negative impacts that these AI data centers have on our communities. So what can we do? Because I think it's important when we look at the actual facts and balance the benefits, right? Love using AI, love using all this. That's great. But it doesn't come for free. It comes with serious impacts to communities. And you might say, well, it's not my community, so does it matter? It's kind of like having the garbage dump. We need to have a garbage dump. I just don't want it near me. The problem is, again, these communities are signing NDAs, and they're bringing in data centers all over the place without the community's consent. Utah, the people voted against it. The people said, no, we don't want this. And Utah says, doesn't matter, we're bringing it in. And that's what happens is you may be fine now, but what if in a year or two, you have a data center right behind your house? What then? Because that's what's happening, not just to rural communities, not just to, areas that have nobody around. It's happening to people even in suburban areas where there's houses all around, data center right behind. So what can we do to make sure that we protect ourselves, especially from an upcoming threat? Because sometimes it's too late once they're already in the community. So you have to be proactive about this. What can we do? Well, work to keep data centers out. This involves talking to your officials now, because who knows, they might already be talking to data centers. They probably are. I live in an area where there's data center conversation going on all around us. And yes, there's petitions out and all the rest, but it's kind of too late in some areas because they've already signed paperwork. And it's not just the rural areas. It's not just the areas that are far out in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes it's right in towns. So work to keep data centers out before they come. Number two, stay informed of the reality, not just the hype. Remember, what the AI companies say, that's different than what they do. Don't look at just what they say, because they love to talk to you about, hey, we're going to bring parks in. We're going to put a new school in. We're going to put water fountains in, make this area great again. But the reality is they don't do that. That's not what happens. What happens is it hurts the community. It drives down property prices. It causes issues throughout the entire region. And that's not something they're addressing. So stay informed of the reality, not just the hype. Don't just take people's word for it. On either side, look at what actually happened. Look at the actual actions, the actual impacts. Look at actual communities that already have these things or further down the road, like we've done today, and see, ooh, that's not what I want for my community. Number 3, evaluate the long-term consequences, not just the short-term benefits. Long-term consequences, it's hard to see sometimes, which is why you have to look at other areas that have already done it to see what does it actually mean. But look at the long-term consequences. Because what if they do build 3 new electric plants? They say, hey, you know what? We're going to donate 3 plants to your electric grid and this is happening because then, we'll have the power we need, but, long-term, you're going to have that power too. But what if they go away? You're stuck footing the bill for that for years. And even in the cases where I say, hey, we're going to pay for it for 20 years. Like Microsoft has a 20-year lease on Three Mile Island. But guess what? After that, the community pays, right? So you might say, well, I don't really care. 20 years from now, you will. And yes, it's a long time. That's, so far away. The world might go on by that point. Who knows? But that's still something you need to consider. Is that there's long-term consequences. I mean, it's not even that long-term. Water usage, it's a short-term thing. It's a now issue. Number 4, ask good questions. Don't just take people's word for it. Don't just accept what they say. Ask questions. Question it. Why is that the case? Are you sure? How have you shown that you've done that before? Ask good questions. Number 5, vote for updates to the laws. We have to change how our laws work, how our system works to reflect the current reality. And the current reality is changing fast. It's different than it was, but we have to stay informed of that. We have to understand that. We have to make sure the people representing us understand that as well, and that we all make changes that are necessary to adjust to the current reality, not just use an old system like the old manufacturing model for giving people grants and other money. We need to make sure that we update those laws to reflect the current reality. So AI, it does hurt communities a lot. And if we aren't careful, if you don't step into the moment, what happens is we just let it happen. It's too late. And we have all the consequences for all of their benefits. So AI can be a good thing. But you know what? The way we go about building out the infrastructure for AI is important. We can't just let communities get steamrolled in order to say, well, but it's progress. We have to make sure that we have a balance of progress and protection. So I hope this helped. I hope that you found value in this. Let me know down in the comments what you've seen as the impact in your community with AI and how it's come in with your data centers. All right. Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.